Christian Torres, Director of Climate Equity and Resilience here at Comite Civico Valle. My current role actually came about at the beginning of this year. Prior to that, I'd been the Special Projects Manager for about 5 years, and then I worked as my first year at TCB as the Air Monitoring Technician. So the role was designed to be, again, a director level role to oversee a lot of the programs and initiatives we have on climate change, around policy advocacy, around our infrastructure work as we develop, amenities for Imperial Valley, as well as our campaign and initiative work with other local partners, statewide partners, and nationwide partners. Civico, it was founded by farm workers to really help that farm worker community that was very close knit, and had come about together really because there was a lot of the same injustices happening within that community. Immigrants coming into a new country, not knowing the language, being disregarded in public spaces, being demeaned in a lot of other ones, and they saw a real need when their children were being put into remedial classes because they didn't speak English, as that was tradition back in the day. So a lot of the original services that Comite did was all around language access, citizenship assistance, and immigration efforts. Through the years, we evolved into what is now really a popular term, which is environmental justice, because a lot of the work we were doing, whether it was health education, environmental protections, organizing for social justice issues, falls within that umbrella. Environmental justice encompasses all of that. And a lot of those principles is what we still do, right? Like that is our priority mission. We're an environmental justice organization that works with community to address problems affecting them, affecting their region, their environment, their health, now their economics, because as this new opportunity comes in the Imperial Valley, we're having to work with community to make sure that they're not taken advantage of and they can actually benefit from all these investments that are already in their public lands. I've never had an instance where somebody doesn't appreciate the assistance that we were able to do, whether it's directly or indirectly through the work, right? A lot of our direct assistance programs, and this is where I really got to grow a lot, was through our emergency responses, whether it's through earthquakes, fires, floods. When the pandemic hit, we were able to launch a branch of the direct financial assistance that the state and a lot of philanthropy was doing. Foundations were wanting to help, but they didn't know how to reach residents. So we were able to bridge that gap and be able to do that work. And, we were serving over 1,000 households in Imperial. And that is a really big population, but we also know that Imperial has a big undocumented population, and they were the ones that needed that assistance the most because they were falling through the cracks. Whenever we've done emergency response work to fires or floods, these are people that have lost their homes, can't go back there, and are sometimes just stuck with whatever they have on their back and in their hands. So they've always been appreciative. When we go talk to folks about certain policy initiatives that we pushed based on, again, recommendations from community members and like identifying a problem that sometimes we might not be aware of. Like I grew up in Calexico, the borders town of Imperial County, but I'm not aware of what the issues in Island were growing up because I was just so separated from it. But when we go talk about like the Community Air Protection Program established through AB 617 here in California, people appreciate that there's something being done to fix the problems around air quality. Why? Because they either have been sick, have had a respiratory issue, or they have a family member or a friend. So it's always been a connection that they have to issues, even if they're not directly affected by them, and they see the benefits of or the indirect benefit of us working on policy like that are bringing not just awareness, but also actual resources to address a lot of these problems. So the environment in Imperial County is tricky to describe because it's a little bit of an oxymoron of how we live. We're a big agricultural community stuck in the middle of a desert. Now that doesn't make sense when you think about it geographically, but when you create a channel from the Colorado River to an area that had ample plots of land to grow, that's how it came to be, right? But we are stuck in a very tricky situation where we have a lot of manufacturing south of the border because we sit on the border of California and Mexico, which creates a lot of emissions. And, you're not capturing all that with a border fence, right? That still circles around the air basin here. You have the Salton Sea to the north of us, that has had agricultural and industrial runoff deposited over 100 years, which is now being blown into the communities of Imperial, Coachella, and even Mexicali because we share an air basin. And then to the east and west, you have desert lands, which, the dust is still blown into these communities. And that is the reality of being in a valley where everything is going to kind of circle and linger for a while, especially during certain parts of the year. And then, you look at what we're seeing now is going to be a lot of issues being affected by climate migration. So as climate change makes other areas of the world uninhabitable and they try to immigrate into the US because we're on the border, we're a community that is going to be the first ones receiving a lot of these folks. And we don't want them to end up in dangerous situations. So we have to build an environment here that can both sustain immigration and also address these other issues that, again, have been encompassed here over, I think at this point, 120 plus years. Sure. So the Salton Sea is technically an accidental lake created through an incident where there was a dam blown and it created this pathway for water from Colorado River to end up in the between Imperial County and in Riverside County. Um, the water sits on what was the ancient Lake Cahuilla, which is again a very historical cultural resource mark. Um, and historically, the Salton Sea had been tourist and resort destination for a lot of folks. Up until the 50s and 60s, you could see a lot of the Hollywood kind of celebrities come out to the Salton Sea. You still see a lot of the old hotels near the Salton Sea that have a lot of pictures of, it starts from the 50s and 60s, like Lucille Ball, for instance, the Rat Pack, they were out here. Um, but unfortunately, through a lot of the one agricultural practices in both parts of the counties, right? Imperial and Riverside are big agricultural areas. Runoff has to go somewhere, so it ended up being deposited into the sea. Then you get to the early 2000s, and you have the QSA, which is an agreement to divert water away from this region, and you see the sea starting to dry up. So what started out as an accidental lake that was a huge tourist destination has now been a sump where runoff is now being exposed to the air.
And so with the decrease of this agricultural runoff that was essentially just sustaining what was left of Lake Coahuila, um, what are some of the health and environmental challenges that poses?
So again, it kind of makes it an exponential exposure to what we have here because of the way that our air basin sits, right? All these different types of exposure where if the deserts to the east and the west, manufacturing to the south, and with the Salton Sea just now receding so much year on year because of all these water transfers that basically stop sustaining the level of the sea, that we know that runoff from pesticides applied in the past that have been deposited there for decades are now going to be exposed to communities. We've completed community research studies with a lot of different schools and a lot of different organizations and communities that show that some of this windblown dust is coming into their residences or is coming into their communities. And what that means is that we have some of the highest asthma rates in the California, maybe in the country at this point, because of just how bad air quality can be here. And as we're preparing for another set of water transfers and less influence of the Salton Sea, we are going to have to be dealing with even more windblown dust. In the past, it might have not made the news that that somebody exposed to this might have had a condition triggered or things like that. But we're now getting to the point where when these conditions are triggered, they're triggered at a younger age. They're triggered into communities that don't have the best healthcare access. So now you have here children that might be in elementary school even passing away from asthmatic attacks triggered by exposure to areas like this. Now we can't say that if the Salton Sea did that, but growing up around the Salton Sea might not be the most beneficial option for things like that. So the attention to lithium extraction kind of triggered around 3 to 4 years ago, um, when you really did start seeing, I think, more of a harbor and a lot of the initiatives to move towards zero emission vehicles. Now, how do you get to zero emission vehicles? Well, you're going to electrify it. And to do that, you need lithium to produce batteries. So that's been a shift, and it's put Imperial County and really the Salton Sea region into international spotlight. So now you have companies with international investors coming out here. Uh, one, doing pilot projects to identify, is there a lithium resource? And at this point, we can say there is. There's been federally funded studies that show that. And now it's just about viability. Can we extract this lithium enough to make profit? And what that's put us under is that while the attention is now shifting towards a manufacturing and extraction economy, the environmental and health aspect has been kind of put to the side. And it doesn't really resolve the issue or even the responsibility of stakeholders that are supposed to be addressing these issues. What we've seen is that there are mitigation projects and restoration projects that are not going to be completion. You see opportunities where they are not reneging on their responsibilities, but I think trying to shift where the responsibility is going to come from. Like in the lithium excise tax, SB 125, passed 2 years ago, well, the state is now taking 20% off the top from that to pay for Salton Sea programs. Now, they've had the Salton Sea as their responsibility for years, but now are making sure that they can at least fund part of it, but it's coming through the community's benefits, not through the state's coffers, which it should have been covering already. So it's a weird shift. It's a very concerning shift to a lot of our community. One of the things that we've done is engage with them over the last 3 years on a lot of these things happening because they've often been left out of the decision-making process. So when we bring community to public hearings that the Energy Commission's been holding on the Lithium Valley Blue Ribbon Commission and things like that, their primary concerns are really around what are we going to do about the Salton Sea? What's going to happen to everybody's health if you take something out or start taking water away from it? And often now, because the conversation shifted to the economic benefits, is there going to be a job, and what kind of jobs are there going to be for me or for my family, my friends, etc. Yeah, there's a lot of different concerns that have come up. Again, reducing the inflows of water into the Salton Sea, not just through the water transfers, but also through the freshwater inputs that you're going to need to take lithium out of the geothermal area. Um, there's also going to be concerns from workers who are going to be operating these facilities, who are going to be working, whether it's in manufacturing, logistics, warehousing, whatever, what they could be exposed to. This is a new novel technology, right? It hasn't been done to scale, so we don't know what those impacts are going to be, and how to protect community from those. So even within the industry itself, they know geothermal. Geothermal has been here since the 1980s, and 40 plus years on. I think the question now is, well, if you add additional technology that does something completely different, well, what is that going to do to me, right? So I think we've taken on multiple roles depending on where the issue has been throughout the last couple of years. Early on, we were asked to be, assisting with the Blue Ribbon Commission, helping host those meetings. At the staff level, we were doing that, but we were you also lucky enough to have our directors sit on the Blue Ribbon Commission themselves, representing disadvantaged communities. Again, a population that is often ignored in a lot of these bodies. So it was great that they actually identified the need to have somebody representing that space. And in that commission, we were able to, as an organization, voice a lot of these concerns for the long-term planning, how to resolve a lot of these underlying issues that have led Imperial to be in not the best position in a lot of aspects, both for health, environment, economics. Um, and shifting from that, after the commission produced this report, the organizing efforts continued. We were the anchor organization for the Lithium Valley Community Coalition, and that's a coalition of local advocates, both organizers in the EJ space, social justice space, as well as in the labor space. So you have labor unions in hand with us, and through that body is where we were able to bring community together, work with local electeds, work with our state representatives to get SB 125, which is the lithium excise tax. So that was the next step. How can we ensure community is benefiting from uh, public minerals being removed from this area? Um, and then we were also now part of the groups that are trying to bring additional resources to prepare our populations for potential employment opportunities. We don't want to see a repeat of what's happened in the past, where you have a new industry. And the favorite example that we always point to is solar development out here. Solar development took a huge boom in the 2010s, and you had folks training for a year to get a certificate to build out solar. They built it, and then you only need a handful of people instead of hundreds of people to maintain it. So a lot of people lost their employment. A lot of my friends that graduated at the same time as me had no opportunity, so they had to leave. So you see a big brain drain. So what we have to do this time is really prepare our population. So that means working with the local community college, working with the extended university campuses to prepare either an extended campus that can address a 4-year degree career pathway. The community college is doing certificate programs for plant operators, chemical analysts, and others. And what we've been able to do in working with them in those spaces is also produce and identify what are the things that are going to stop our community from actually going to those programs or succeeding post those programs. So we've been able to do what's called in California a high road training partnership grant. And that really helped us identify, by working with over 200 community members, what are your challenges? And those challenges, anecdotally, we know have been access to childcare, access to transportation, access for tuition assistance. So now it's been documented, quantified, and we can now use that as evidence to help either the local educators or help government kind of go and ask for those assistance pathways to make sure community members are able to access those resources. And even at the federal level, we are looking at what those investments can be to ensure that when opportunities come about, such as this year, I believe it's the EDA Recompetes grant that is supposed to help communities kind of coming out of COVID really build an economic resiliency, right, structure. And now you see that for lithium, because lithium being a hot term, even at the federal level, it's being dignified as a critical resource and part of national security issues. So there's those opportunities there. And locally, we are sort of replicating that through the California Jobs First program. We were one of the original grant applicants to that program for the region of Imperial and San Diego counties, as we've been kind of lumped together. And through that space, again, we're listening to community and uplifting their concerns and what they want to see in the future. And not just around lithium, because lithium is one aspect, but you're also going to have indirect industries that are going to develop from lithium extraction and manufacturing. So we want to know, okay, if you want to build a restaurant, well, what do you need to succeed to get there? Because we are going to need thousands of extra workers in port, either grown here in Imperial County or being brought in and training others to be able to sustain. And to sustain a lot of that, you need amenities. And some folks that we've been working with have ideas that they've had forever, and now we're kind of helping organize through the state effort that's California Jobs First to how do you turn that idea into an actual project? Like, how do you make it something tangible that is going to be sustainable, one, and is also going to benefit your community, which in the case of Imperial, we just need to ensure that it is viable, right? Like it stays around longer than a year, because as we know, most businesses tend to fail within a year. But here in Imperial, we want to have longstanding traditions of family-owned businesses, local businesses. Yeah. I feel that there is pressure, definitely, to meet those goals, right? Of nothing but zero emission vehicles being sold as new in California by 2035. And the phase out of internal combustion engines coming like years prior to that is putting that pressure on, because we just don't have the natural resource to produce this. But I don't think the state is the only kind of body pushing towards that. And, I think the state's ambitious in doing that, but they're doing it with I think, a very good goal in mind, in that we want to reduce carbon emissions from combustion engines, and that this is why we need to accelerate this. I feel like the pressure is more at the local level with local government, where they're seeing this as this is the one chance we get to make sure that we can generate a lot of local revenue. So they're more greedy and pushing permits, for pushing plans to get done really quickly without actually consulting with community. And To us, that's putting the pressure that we have to make sure the community is aware that they can engage sometimes in a very short process because there's a lot of reductions that tend to happen in timelines now, and be aware of what the consequences are going to be because Imperial doesn't have the biggest civic engagement numbers. It's one of the lowest voting counties across the U.S. You have a population that doesn't go to city council meetings, doesn't go to board of supervisors meetings, doesn't go to like school board meetings, and really what they are missing out on is the opportunity to inform plans that could dictate the next 40 to 50 years of life here. And that's what's put a very big alert on our radar to make sure that folks are aware, informed, and engaged in the process. Because if they don't, then it's not just like as an individual that you suffer the consequences, it's a community as a whole. And the history of the Imperial Valley tells us that when those decisions are made by a very select core group, sometimes it isn't to the benefit of the whole community. That's what happened over 100 years ago when pioneers came into this area and claimed a lot of this land, grew their farms, and really did not foresee how the development would occur over the next 100 years of at the agro industry. But now we're all suffering from decisions made back then in agro industry that have limited a lot of opportunities for newer families coming into the space, for local family farms that never were given that scale to grow. So we don't want to repeat what happened over 100 years ago. I mean, from my point of view, someone coming from a research background, I think the pilot projects have proved that it is feasible to do extraction. Now, whether it's financially feasible, that is, I think, the biggest question that investors have in this industry. Because if it was as profitable as everybody's making it seem out to be, I don't think construction would have lagged years behind where it should be. Because at this point, we had been made aware that there were going to be thousands of jobs available, that they were going to be building EVs already with the lithium from Imperial Valley, and it hasn't happened yet. Now, I believe that there needs to be a balance between environmental and economic, because history has shown us that when you don't take into consideration the environmental impacts, you are not going to have a financially good outcome, right? We've seen that here with agriculture. You see it in other areas of the world where mineral extraction has already occurred, and the benefits are to a very local few folks. It's not to the community's benefit. And again, what we're doing here isn't for just these three potential companies that are extracting lithium, but really what's the lasting legacy for Imperial County? And that's where we have to look at it. That's why if folks say, if this is a closed loop system, well, you do produce waste. Is it really closed if you're producing waste? I don't think so. Are you really recycling everything that is being produced by your geothermal facility? No, you do lose some things in the process. So you can't, again, call it a closed loop, environmentally safe system. It's cleaner than technologies in the past, but that doesn't mean it's completely clean. Uh, I think we're in for a real sobering experience. When this whole thing started kind of developing a couple of years ago, you had claims of, we're going to need 20,000 new workers for this whole redevelopment of the area and this changing economy. And as the years have gone by, we're seeing very reduced numbers. Now, there's estimates of up to, not doesn't generally mean that they're going to hit that number, but up to 7,000 maybe jobs total. And those aren't all permanent jobs. I think what a lot of people miss out on is that, there's going to be a big need for the trades to come in and do the construction of facilities, to do construction of newer industries that we might not have here. Like data centers is one of the proposed projects that is right now, they're purchasing land, they're trying to get permits ready and all that. But yeah, I think the numbers we're optimistic, but now that there's more realism coming into play, those numbers are going to be way lower than they were estimated. I think what folks are, at least at the community level, from the conversations we're having, are sobering up to that fact that what has been told to them and promised, quote unquote, because really the companies never did this, but local officials did kind of hammer on this line, is that there are going to be thousands and thousands of jobs. So we need to bring people in. We need to do this. And we've already seen that some of these companies are bringing in engineers or other folks from out of the country because they don't have anybody local to do that. And that's unfortunate because we do know that there is a pipeline for that type of careers. Again, we live across the border from a city of 1.5 million people. There are qualified engineers that they could have hired that are semi-local or can spend in the local economy, but no, they decided to bring them in from other countries instead. That money's not going to stay here long term. They're probably going to do their work and leave, and that's hurtful to us because we can be just as qualified to do this type of work. And I think right now the sobering experience for both, I think, industry and community is that we're not seeing the big hunger from manufacturing to come in and develop here because we're in such a bad spot for infrastructure that they would have to invest a lot more to grow their industry here than they would elsewhere, where you will find the minerals that they need. So I think I think the conversation has been set up for failure from where we were at 2 years ago when, again, even the numbers then were like between 30 and 50,000 jobs. And obviously at this point, then we can see that that isn't going to be what materializes. Yeah. I think specifically, I have had thoughts just based on where we see the market for lithium kind of going up and down year on year. It was at a high when a lot of these promises were being made. Now the price of lithium is nearing rock bottom to where it's usually been. So I think that's factored in by emerging technologies or the exploration of newer minerals compositions in these new technologies. Now, whether that happens, we don't know, right? Like sometimes there's technological breakthroughs that just come in and disrupt the whole system and make new things happen. So would we be opposed to that? I don't think so. I think, if a new, better technology is in place that can benefit the environment and make sure that we meet our climate goals, I think that's a benefit that we should be looking out for. Um, if that harms the industry, then I feel like, well, innovation is what it's always done, right? Like innovation's always put one industry out of business. I feel like if that were to happen, that what we would do as an organization is work to ensure that there's at least a transition program for those workers that might not have a long-lasting career then. Similar to what we're going to be seeing now with farm workers not having the opportunities that they've historically had because of the water transfers out of Imperial, the directive by IID to create fallowing programs that are going to take agricultural land out of production on certain seasons. We want to make sure that those workers find a new career pathway. And if that were to happen with lithium extraction, we want to make sure that whoever's there has at least an opportunity to transition. I think what we've heard, and is maybe more of a happy news scenario in that case, is that the certificate programs that IBC is doing for workers right now and trying to get them ready for that lithium extraction and plant and all these different career paths aren't limited to just lithium. These are more general pathways to be able to work across renewables. And renewables is a big push that California has, and even it's a lot of different parts of the US. So they have opportunities to go into another type of industry, not just stay with lithium. So I think that's the silver lining in that situation. But I would not be opposed to new technologies coming in and still being of benefit to our environment and our health. It's nothing new as environmental justice advocates to hear that being said about you or your organization. Um, and the way we'll operate is that we're going to move at the trust of community, right? Like that's the speed we're going to move at. We want to make sure, again, we're not beholden to investors. We beholden to our community because we've been here, we're from here, we're going to be here long term. We're not a CEO or a president of a company that's coming in, seeing a project, and then going back home. We have to live with the consequences of what happens here. So if we're in support of something, we're going to ensure that it's the best possible outcome for our community. In the past, we have had open communications with a lot of these local companies and the local agencies, and have collaborated pretty well. We've worked with Imperial County on a lot of response efforts. We have worked with them on reports that addressed issues here in Imperial County. We worked with them really hands-on on through the pandemic, doing a lot of emergency responses, working with them to secure PPE for the county in general, like millions and millions of PPE, to do vaccination clinics when we were at the height of COVID deaths per capita, which Imperial County ranked as one of the top counties in the U.S. for the unfortunately. So, our principles uh, drive us to that to make sure that those outcomes are secured in the best possible way. So we aren't just going to move quickly because a private investor wants to move quickly. That's not what we are beholden to. When companies want to move really quickly, it's because they do have investors to look at. They do have contracts that they've already signed to deliver on time. But again, I reiterate that they're not here for the foreseeable future. So they might be here to do this for a generation and leave, and the rest of us are going to be either thriving from the benefits that might appear or living through the consequences as we've had to in the past. So as we've been burnt many different times, and I say we as an Imperial Valley, we have to be aware that this is a stand we can take now so that we don't suffer additional consequences. I think a lot of the public narrative lately has been painted that because we are, we're willing to file litigation, we're willing to show up and do public comment, we're willing to bring external consultants to really help break down a lot of these issues for community so that they can engage, right? Like that's the whole point. Like it's a community-driven process. So you better be able to explain what happens in planning, what happens in CEQA, what happens in assessments of whether it's land use assessments, planning department tests, and all that. So I feel like we've shown that we're really invested in making sure that the outcomes are right for community in this. Uh, we are building infrastructure for electric vehicles, something that I think across California hasn't been seen in the nonprofit world. We've been the first ones to be able to leverage programs that the state put together to basically help public agencies and private industry do that. And yet a nonprofit is the first one to be able to do that. So that, if that doesn't show that we're committed to the transition, it and creating what I think is going to be the market for these companies that are going to be producing lithium, right? For their lithium to go somewhere into an EV, you need the chargers. And the reason we did it isn't to create that space for them, but because we don't want to be the zone where the just transition is going to bloom from, right? At least in transportation, and that we don't even get those benefits. That would be the biggest injustice, that we produce all this lithium for everybody else to drive around EVs, and that we don't even have our community have the amenities to even access those electric vehicles and the benefits from them when it comes to reduced emissions, reduced health concerns, and all of that. So I just wanted to add that part. I think for Lithium Valley, I want to see the questions around environment and health impacts addressed before this thing gets to the point where there is no turning back. There's going to be certain markers I think that industry will hit to make sure that they can deliver on lithium, but it shouldn't come at shortcuts and at the expense of community. So I'm hoping that we have a safe and sustainable and responsible extraction industry developed, and that eventually leads to high road career pathways for our community. What that means is that you are going to have a a salary that will support a household. I don't think it's beneficial to see 4 to 5 family members having to work to maintain a household. That's inhumane at this point. It's not what made America great in the past. Coming out of depression, coming out of World War II, the economy was booming. There was all this manufacturing, all these industries that were emerging. And as we shifted into technology, this is still the same space. We're in technology, it's just this technology is different. It's about renewable energy, it's about mineral extraction, it's about electric vehicles, electrifying the grid, all these things. But I wanted to be able to create those opportunities for our residents. We don't need to see a brain drain. I don't think we need to see everybody from between 18 and 25 having to leave the area to go find these opportunities elsewhere. Uh, because that dilutes what our culture could be. If you look around Imperial Valley, you don't really see what our culture is. It's pretty bland. It's pretty faceless, and I think given the very very strong backgrounds that a lot of the population here comes from, because we are a very immigrant heavy population, whether it's first, second, or third generation at this point. You don't see that reflected in our communities. So ultimately, what I hope is that Imperial Valley gains its identity back, right? And that it is a thriving community because you have your identity, you have access to opportunities, and you're doing it without harming the environment and people's health. And ultimately, I mean, that's the goal that we're trying to achieve in a lot of our work. And that's what we push so hard because there's no shortcuts, I think, to that. It has to be everybody working together collaboratively and with the understanding that, we've already seen this go sideways in the past. We can't let it go sideways again.